Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan Quickie article. Now, last time we spent a bit of time talking about pretty much my first real opportunity to talk about Prater LLC, sort of like a little bit of a small organization based out of Goochland, Virginia, and about how, when you think about it, it's probably among one of the better things that has actually happened to Chris because Chris was being paid royalties and they actually managed to get Chris's house in Big Island once Chris came out of jail. Not everybody is like that thrilled about it because they feel like, well, Chris is still Chris, and Chris still manages to get exactly whatever he wants without having to do any sort of work for it whatsoever. However, we sort of move away from this because we're going to go a little bit further back in time to talk about one MKR Nightv. Somebody who I feel like was, I don't want to say a white knight towards Chris, but um, getting involved with Chris in any capacity is probably the worst thing you could do from a just from my perspective. However, that's part of the reason why I don't do it. But what I am gonna add before we continue a little bit further, just based on what we're going to be reading out of today regarding MKR Nightv, there's reasons I'm going to deter you guys a little bit from just doing the things that MKR Nightv does because you're about to find out just why these things don't work. Sorry, I've got to. I did all of this yesterday. I don't know what the. See, sorry about this, guys. Right. Anyway, well, I'll come to that later. It's not important at the moment. But let's get started with Miss Nightv, shall we? Note on credibility. MKR Nightv has been deemed to be an unreliable narrator for the following reasons. 1. MKR is a habitual liar and has been given misleading and contradictory statements, sometimes purposely even leaving out key context. 2. Is noted for having delusions of grandeur. 3. MKR often says edgy or disgusting things purely for shock value. 4. MKR is prone to having temper tantrums and instigating smear campaigns against others. Now, to be fair, if MKR Nightv just so happens to be watching this, almost certainly not, well, maybe this is a bit of an opportunity to possibly stand your ground if you want to. Yeah, if there's anything you disagree on, and maybe if there's things they've gotten wrong about it, you're more. I'm very very open to people to give their side if it concerns them, but yeah, if Nightv doesn't want to get involved again, I can understand why. Meanwhile, anyway, bear all these in mind and use healthy skepticism when taking statements from the subject being discussed. I am a CPU. That means I am directly on the same level of godhood as Christine. Megan replying to Sarah and Steve, questioning if she really follows Chris's beliefs. Not Megan Schroeder, by the way, in case you are getting confused. I can only become better if you help me. I need you in my life. MKR's last ditch attempt to manipulate Chris back to her side. Megan Kathleen Ringo, more commonly known as MKR Nightv, or MKR for short, or CPU Magenta Heart, and sometimes referred to as Maker by Chris, appeared in December 2018 and was active as a white knight and fantasy enabler on Twitter and Discord, until Chris cut ties with her in July of 2021, citing her toxic behavior. Chris calls someone else toxic in July of 2021. There's something so bizarrely ironic with that. She got into contact with Chris through Twitter. This during the height of Chris's defense mode phase, as we're going to call it, because you may remember this was during a period where loads of people on Twitter were starting to block Chris, and Chris couldn't quite understand why anything relating to her behavior online and offline would cause people to have a little bit of a based opinion about Chris because of everything we knew about her and everything that she was proving herself to be, despite her claims to the contrary. Then a friend looking up Chris's phone number for her, she presented herself to Chris as being the CPU goddess of the Nintendo Switch console, offering her validation of his fantasies of being a CPU and having magic powers. She has claimed that my goal isn't to feed into his delusions so much as it is to gently offer kind advice and be there as a shoulder to lean on for moral support. I'm trying to help him better himself. It is unclear how MKR thought encouraging Chris's delusions with Hyperdimension Neptunia CPU lore would lead to him becoming better, if that was even the road they were going down. MKR acted notably possessive towards Chris. She created or spread lies about several other people interacting with Chris, even to the extent of falsely accusing them of criminal activity. She also became irritated with Chris when she felt that he was ignoring her, and reacted with anger when Chris decided to leave her group's Discord server, The Place, due to toxicity from her and others in the group. MKR attempted to emotionally manipulate Chris into returning, but he stood his ground, possibly for once in his entire life, and insisted she work on improving herself first. Interactions with Chris. She set up a Discord group with Chris, telling her friends from the Sons of the Miscreants Discord server to roleplay as CPU goddesses to gain Chris's trust while also instituting a no trolling rule. Under her assistance, Owls and would-be Watchmen members would roleplay as goddesses while in contact with Chris. MKR has stated to doing this out of the belief that doing so will somehow better him. Again, no evidence is given as to how MKR thought this was going to happen, or what the result would have been when obviously this was just not going to work, or when logic comes full circle and it would insinuate that actually she was making things worse. When MKR first appeared on the scene, Ting Ting was suspicious of her due to MKR being an enabler of Chris's delusions. Tings was particularly suspicious of MKR's usage of the Hyperdimension Neptunia CPU lore to gain Chris's attention, as the idea guys had pioneered the use of the lore to manipulate Chris. Tings reached out to Chris with her suspicions, to which Chris defended MKR. On the 21st of January 2019, a Kiwi Farms thread was posted about MKR. The thread included several pages of chat logs from the Sons of the Miscreants Discord server, in which MKR had discussed her interactions with Chris and recruited Discord users to chat with him. Tings pointed out the thread to Chris and warned him of MKR's belittling and mocking comments about him in the chats, her usage of the CPU lore to trick him, and also alleging MKR and her friends to be trolls and advising Chris to cut all contact. Chris responded, "My head hurts." Tings pressed further, asking him, "You're still following MKR. Are you choosing the reassuring lie?" Chris responded, "I'm talking to her about the issue. I have not completely processed the details yet." Tings also confronted MKR. In August of 2020, Chris offered her several of his possessions in his last will and testament. MKR claimed to the Sons of the Miscreants that Chris had attempted to get back into contact with Megan Schroeder with her assistance, to which she declined. Also, Megan stated that she owned guns, and they wanted Chris to know this. Yeah, I'd say that's about as big an advert as you can say, where don't contact me ever again. I don't think they could have made it any more clearer. On the 4th of January 2021, Chris bought a Funko Pop figure of Transformers character Starscream, then mentioned to MKR that he thought it was something she would like and asked for confirmation of her address. MKR replied that the figure was cute and then sent her address details. MKR has created a Nightv amulet for Chris in 2018-19. MKR first tweeted to Chris's Quick Solitude account on the 27th of December 2018, claiming to have powers. Replying to a tweet Chris made about the Commodore 64, MKR tweeted, Great news! I'm so happy for you. I recently was gifted my Switch, as well as I'm still trying to work out my powers. But I'll do my best for humanity's sake and for you, MKR. You know, actually, it's just occurred to me right now. But you know what? There's a character in in Cyber Dimension Neptunia for Goddesses Online that is specifically meant to be like a cat princess character, and it resembles the exact same color scheme: pink hair, black dress. Um, yeah, it actually kind of resembles the attire MKR was going. I have not played. I haven't even finished Four Goddesses Online. Um, but you know what? Maybe I should. Maybe I should just play that game from the beginning because I had a lot of fun playing that game, and it didn't even occur to me right now. So, do you think that was in any way trying to gain Chris's confidence? If I try and dress up like a character from Hyperdimension Neptunia, then that's probably the way to go. It's possible that that's not true at all, and that's just a weird coincidence. But I couldn't see it not being a possibility. I mean, it doesn't take that much to convince Chris anyway, so why not? Anyway, sorry, where were we? During the TF2 analysis saga, she created an alternative Twitter account named Queen Marina and shared it with Chris to enable him to avoid blocks. On the 17th of February 2021, Chris lamented his feelings of loneliness in The Place. He posted that he had considered MKR as among a potential list of options for a relationship, tagging her Discord handle in the process. Weeks later, on the 12th of March 2021, Chris posted in The Place about his lover's attributes list, tagging MKR and asking if any of the items on the list matched with her. As a Watchman. Bullying the Weens leads to more fun than quick. MKR on bullying the Weens. During the Jacob Sockless saga, in which Jacob Sockless attempted to manipulate Chris into a sexual relationship, the Watchmen saw the potential danger in Sockless's activities and helped steer Chris away from him during the summer of 2019. Sockless, who at the time was engaging in a full-scale war against Chris's enablers, followers, and critics alike, considered MKR to be a notable enemy of his, and apparently abused her verbally on Twitter, as his second dramatic cycle approached its climax in early November. She and the other Watchmen largely mitigated Sockless's influence over Chris, though Chris was still willing to listen to Sockless. In September of 2019, when Sockless announced a plan to come to Ruckersville by train, Chris took to Twitter to post an audio clip. Chris releases a statement regarding Jacob Sockless, telling him to stay away. MKR later claimed that Christine herself came to me afraid and upset and asked Jacob not to come over, and that Chris asked for it to be stopped. MKR was involved in infighting within the Watchmen as well. On the 28th of June 2021, Spunky posted an account of her time with the Watchmen in which she described being belittled by both Nort and MKR. MKR voted for the WCT to take over the role of Lane Chew in February of 2021. MKR has since discussed with Kyle and an unknown Watchman about the ethics of enabling Chris in a 9th of March 2021 second layer chat, stating that it's necessary to enable Chris with his delusions in order to protect him from malicious trolls. In this chat, she states, most people don't understand what dealing with a Chris is like. They say feeding his delusions is gonna kill him or something, but honestly, it doesn't matter at this point, under the belief that Chris cannot change. True, but I wouldn't go around encouraging it either. The way Chris was acting, ignoring his true friends in favor of Prater and ignoring that really nice heartfelt birthday message I posted to him while retweeting and responding to so many tweets. This is MKR on Chris talking to Prater LLC. On the 5th of March 2021, MKR lashed out at Chris over Twitter in a fit of jealousy. A month prior, MKR had learned that Chris was planning to use a taser on his quartz crystals in an attempt to activate the dimensional merge, which his new friend group, Praetor, was going to let him borrow. Now, MKR, among other Watchmen, took to spreading a vicious rumor on the planned taser usage. Though nearly a month had passed, on the 5th of March, MKR sent an angry tweet directed towards Chris, which expressed her disdain. Join the club there. She then temporarily deleted her Twitter account a few days later. However, this was a ruse by MKR designed to manipulate the public and Praetor. MKR believed that by dramatically acting as if she was quitting on Chris, it would lull Praetor into a false sense of security. She also claimed to the other Watchmen that her Twitter account's true intent was to draw the attention of Weens in order to put them on full blast. She reactivated her account and tweeted again to Chris in April, relaying to Chris, tagging her to show a GIF file, and later to reply to another of Chris's tweets in order to call one of his enablers, well, a slur about gay people. Yeah, I'm not using that word as you possibly suggested. Finally, Chris cutting ties. Well, not finally, there's a little bit more to this. In June of 2021, internal conflict arose among Watchmen members over Nort doxing the WCT, which resulted in the group separating. MKR had sided with Nort and Chris against, leading to Chris distancing herself from MKR in the fallout. MKR attempted to emotionally manipulate Chris into returning to her side. On the 29th of June, MKR tagged Chris's Twitter and posted, "You're obviously good at using people and then moving on to the next. Had fun getting fucked over by the WCT and Praetor." She followed up by tweeting that she regretted having spent her time drawing art for Chris and accused him of being unappreciative of it. On the 26th of June 2021, Chris left the Watchmen Discord server The Place. He and MKR discussed the matter over text from the 1st to the 3rd of July. Chris mentioned that he feels her, Nort, and Kyle were toxic after hearing edgy comments regarding racism and Nazis in voice chats and movie nights, and therefore dubbed all three of them as part of the toxic trio. Chris also complained about Nord's attempts at doxing both Spunky and the WCT for not allowing him to use their Kiwi Farms accounts. Chris ended with a request for the toxic trio to shape up, clear themselves up spiritually, let go of their respective egos, and become most genuinely enlightened to fully comprehend. Whatever that means. Otherwise, Chris would not return to the place. Boo-hoo. Megan tried to guilt-trip Chris into returning to her by telling him that she felt her image has been ruined thanks to Chris, and how she feels betrayed and hurt. MKR then said, "She can only become better if you help me. I need you in my life." To which Chris stood his ground and responded that she can only help herself. The aftermath. Following the incest leaks, Mean Girls leader Spooky Bones reached out to MKR over Twitter, and then she falsely suggested that the WCT might have wanted Chris to kill himself. MKR was then invited to the Halal server, a Discord server run by Spooky's associates, where Spooky would interview her about WCT's role with Chris. MKR also tried to get a former Watchmen member to convince editor PsychoNerd054 to add information about a Nightv medallion she made for Chris. OCs, which I don't really feel like there's too much to add, so I think we're just going to continue. I'm slightly concerned about going through the art, and, well, that's just about that. But there is, of course, a notes section we may as well go over. Used a cropped version of a 3-year-old photo to claim she was gifting an item to Chris for his next birthday. Claimed via Twitter that she wasn't enabling Chris's delusions while away from Twitter, and that she only watched movies and discussed interests. However, in her DMs, so with Chris, she tried to introduce an OC named Angelfly, and in Discord chats, she helped enable his fantasies. 3. has falsely claimed that Prater wanted Chris to use a stun gun on himself and purposely left out key parts of a conversation between them and Chris to make this seem true, in an attempt to smear the group. 4. After Anaxis tried to suggest the Watchmen approach Prater less aggressively, MKR viewed this as him betraying her, and ended the conversation with, "You'll grow to love me. They all do eventually, except Cat, he likes himself more." 5. In a chat between MKR and Chris involving him leaving the Play server, Chris complains about her, as well as Nort and Kyle, making racist comments about Nazis, but then MKR then states that she doesn't regret her dark or even cringy sense of humor. So she did say them then. And 6. Has falsely claimed Prater planned to use a taser on Chris despite the taser discussion call, indicating Prater was opposed to it. Has also falsely claimed that the WCT probably wanted Chris to kill himself in a similar manner to Randy Stair. In response to the WCT and Chris leaving her group's Discord server, on top of that, MKR came to believe that Chris didn't appreciate her enough when he started talking to the Praters. Claimed to Gibby that the WCT wanted to use Chris to become famous. This is despite the fact that Prater had already done some work with other notable Virginia-based locale Tommy Tutor. Probably not a great idea because of, well, every other thing we've discussed and every other thing that's happened well before the Praters came onto the scene. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the MKR Nightv article. For the most part, it just comes across as somebody tried to become famous and get close to Chris, and then MKR sort of realizing that, well, Chris is still Chris, and if you really do want to get involved, then you can't really make it personal or let your feelings be known, because unfortunately, it makes you come across as incredibly insecure, and yeah, people will try and take advantage of that, especially when everything you do say can be used in evidence. And that's kind of what's happened. So with all that being said and done, I guess I'll see all of you guys again next time, because I'm not entirely sure what else to add. So I'll see all of you guys at the next station. So all aboard!